Hey Billy, want to give you some more content, stuff to work on. It's great to see you playing bass on Sunday. That was kind of nice. This content video, I just want to go over a little bit of connection from the last one. The last one was chock full of good stuff, but premise behind that, hit the right note on beat one, and all the other things don't matter as much. And what I want to do is, we talked about how music is made up of two things, the rhythm and melody. And I want to go from one side to the other, and that is our role. We play rhythm and we play melody, and as a matter of fact, if we look at just normal pop music, it kind of sits right in the middle. We do, it depends on the style of music, but our pendulum can swing in various directions. So pop music, we do a lot of right in the middle, where we do rhythm, where we match up with the drum, but we kind of do it with the drummer, and we stay along with piano chord instrument. If we look at jazz, jazz is a little different, where actually the bass is what keeps the time. And I remember having this discussion or even argument with some drummers, but if we were to take a handful of pieces of music, we would notice that the bass always stays on that quarter note, driving that rhythm, whereas the drums have a little more freedom. The drums on the hi-hat is supposed to actually match up with the bass in jazz. And so there's some neat things with that, and I want to get to that as well. Right now we're going to look at just staying with rhythm. So in kind of a pop style, we're just going to play the note D. Now you notice I just said note D. I'm not telling you the key, I'm not telling you where we're going, it's just one note. We're going to stay in that and see where we can go with the rhythm. Of course we can add various rhythms, but let's just stay with that. So I'm on the 1, 2, 3, third string on the 5th fret, that's my D. I could do the open string, but this is good because you can actually add some extra stuff with that finger, but we'll get to that. So a normal pop rhythm, they do, boom, 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 or if we add a little bit more bass drum, boom, 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 boom. Depends on the song and style, but get into that rhythm and really play around with what you can do with one note. Another thing I'm doing, because I said we're fingering this note, is I'm actually causing the string to stop vibrating when I take pressure off. So that's something to think about. It could be done with this hand too, where you mute it a little bit, which I didn't go into too much, but I'm adding a click in there like it's a snare drum. That's just one note. I'm adding a lot of different rhythms. If we added another, let's say, now I'm going to specify the key, and this will still stay in D, but we're going to go to D minor. Now, a neat thing, we'll get into this, it's a specific scale, but really all we're going to do is we're going to play the two notes. It's going to be this D on the 5th fret of that same string down to the C. So when we play minor, you can add that C, so it's the 2 frets apart, a whole step they call it, and it's going to be a lot of back and forth between the two. But the D is the root. We're going to stay with that, but we're going to go back and forth and just play around with it, see all the different rhythms you can get with that. adding more definition there by adding that note, that could be a D minor, that could actually even be a D7 chord. The guitar was kind of doing something like that, just pedaling on that chord the whole time. Let's go a little bit further. So that's 2 notes. Let's add a third. This one, we could add a bunch of different ones, but let's just add one more, and it's going to be the F, and it's going to be the F that's higher than the D, and it's going to be on the 2nd string. So, you know, string 1 and 2, but it's going to be on the 3rd fret. So here's what we got so far: is we got the D, the roots, which I often would play with my pinky, or the ring, and the C, and then with the same finger that F, and we're going to just go back and forth between those. And primarily, I'm always landing back on that D on beat 1, as you can tell. So we're by adding in more notes, we're adding in this definition of what we can tell the chord is. In this case, because I'm playing that F, it's a D minor chord. Now, we could go into some theory, and I could still play that F, and it could be a D7 with a sharp 9. That's kind of a bluesy chord. Even the Beatles used to use it a lot, and that would still work. Right here is a D7, and it has the major 3rd, the F sharp, but I can still play what I did a moment ago, and that would still work. So play around with that, and again, like we went from rhythm, just one note, we're adding various rhythms, and now we're adding a little bit more melody as we go further and further. I mentioned jazz earlier, and I want to get to that concept because that makes something pretty neat here. So jazz does this thing, if we talk about some traditional jazz, where there's swing involved. The bass player could be all over the place, but the bass player predominantly outlines the chord, and they do some neat things. So first of all, this is not every player and not every one. We often play the roots on beat 1. In jazz, if you try to be a little more heady with it, being a little out there, then you don't play the roots on beat 1 all the time. It could be that we think about phrases, and so we have, instead of just 1 measure at a time, we think of 4 measures at a time, and maybe you hit the first chord on beat 1, you hit the roots, and then other times you add chord tones, they call them, so notes that would be part of the chord that on piano or guitar, the guitar would play. So the roots, the 3rds, the 5ths, even the 7ths could be played. But what I want to mention is a neat thing where in jazz, they play often the root on beat 1, and we've talked about this before, so there's beat 1. Beat 2 is a weak beat, so you can kind of get away with playing a non-chord tone. Beat 3, you often do play a chord tone. It doesn't have to be the roots. And beat 4 really is neat. It all depends on what happens on beat 5 or beat 1 of the next measure. Because in jazz, what they do is they do what's called an approach note. And not all the time, but it's a great rule of thumb, because what's neat about it is the bass player lets you know at beat 4 what the chord is going to be for beat 1 of that next measure. And I'll give you for instance. So if a jazz is being played, you kind of get that feeling. That's just like a standard jazz blues. But what I want to to show you is that, and I can move it up here. Let's say I'm playing, let's go to D because we've been doing D. I'm going from D and then the next chord is a G. I'll play the D on beat 1. On beat 2, I could play something else. Beat 3, likely a chord tone, but it doesn't have to be. But beat 4, I'm going to play a note that's going to lead me to my next chord. So in this case, I'm going from a D to a G. So this note is going to be what's called an approach note. So either an approach note above or below. In jazz, they do half steps often. So there's a half step, and it's telling you that we're going right here. That note really told us what was going to happen. It's kind of neat because the other instruments aren't doing that. The bass gives that away, which is kind of cool. But in pop music, we don't do that kind of half step. We stay within that major scale like we've talked about. So we would do something like, I'm playing this F sharp and it leads us to the G. So we're doing this rhythm here. I'm doing all those half steps on beat 4 so that it leads us to that next one. So I did that. A D, and I added some extra stuff, but on beat 4 was an F sharp, going to the G on beat 1. And I did some stuff between there, but then on beat 4 of that one, I added a C sharp, which led us to the D. Pop music doesn't often add notes that are outside the key, so maybe it would play a C or something, but the C sharp is part of the key of D, so something to think about with that. Play around with that. The other thing is country music tends to do that too. If we're thinking about old country, like bluegrassy, you know, right there. And those are neat things to play with, and I recommend that because there's a lot of, you know, leading. The notes are leading you to where it's going next. So we stay on the D. How that leads us to the next one. You could try that out, and that's from that D with the pattern of the A, B, C sharp, D, and then that kind of that same pattern that leads you to the G. See how we could get right to that G? So we have focus on rhythm. Rhythm, by the way, is such a natural thing to latch onto. If you think of it as when we were babies, we heard the beating of our mother's heart, even in the womb. And so that's such a natural thing for us to grasp onto. So being able to get a rhythm and really latch onto it. And as a matter of fact, speaking of the heartbeat kind of thing, don't you notice that a lot of songs really kind of grasp that type of rhythm, at least with the bass drum? Play around with that, grasp the rhythm, get the timing really good, and then add some more notes. So we're going from the rhythm aspect of music, adding a little bit more melody. And we'll play around that. I'll show you some other things, and it'll be kind of neat. Enjoy. Thanks. Bye.